The Wyoming Territory stretched endlessly under the scorching August sun of 1876, its golden plains interrupted only by the occasional mesa rising like ancient monuments from the earth. Thomas Mackenzie wiped the sweat from his weathered brow as he guided his horse along the dusty trail leading back to his ranch. At 43, Thomas had spent half his life working this unforgiving land, building something from nothing with calloused hands and unwavering determination. The silence of the prairie was broken by a sound that made Thomas pull his reins tight. A low groan echoed from behind a cluster of weathered rocks ahead. His hand instinctively moved to the rifle strapped to his saddle. Relations between settlers and the local Shoshone tribe had been tense lately, with rumors of cattle rustling and territorial disputes spreading through the territory like wildfire. "Easy, Belle," Thomas whispered to his mare, dismounting cautiously. The groaning continued, accompanied by labored breathing that spoke of genuine pain rather than ambush. Around the rocks, Thomas discovered a young Native American man, no more than 25, slumped against the stone. His left leg was twisted at an unnatural angle, and dried blood stained his buckskin clothing. The man's dark eyes met Thomas's with a mixture of defiance and resignation. "You're hurt bad," Thomas said, kneeling despite every instinct screaming at him to remount and ride away. The wounded man tried to speak, but only managed a weak cough. Thomas examined the injury with the practiced eye of someone who had treated countless wounded animals. The leg was definitely broken, and the man had clearly been without water for hours under the brutal sun. Every reasonable voice in Thomas's head told him to leave. The territorial conflicts, the warnings from neighbors, the very real danger of being seen helping a hostile, all of it should have sent him riding away. Instead, Thomas found himself saying, "Can you understand me?" The man nodded weakly. "I'm going to help you up. We need to get you some water and shade." "Why?" the wounded man managed to whisper in accented English. Thomas paused, surprised by the question and his own answer. "Because you're hurt, and I'm here." With considerable effort, Thomas helped the man to his feet, supporting most of his weight. The nearest shelter was Thomas's own ranch, still 3 miles away. The wounded man would never make it walking, even with help. Thomas looked at his horse Belle, then back at the injured stranger. In the territory, a man's horse was often the difference between life and death. Without Belle, Thomas would face a long, dangerous walk home, but leaving this man here was a death sentence. "Belle's a good horse," Thomas said, patting his mare's neck. "She'll carry you gentle." He helped the man onto the saddle, then took the reins to lead them both toward his ranch. "I am called Running Wolf," the man said quietly as they began their slow journey. "Thomas Mackenzie," came the reply. "And right now, Running Wolf, we're just 2 men trying to make it home." The sun continued its merciless assault as they traveled, Thomas walking beside his horse while Running Wolf swayed dangerously in the saddle. Twice, Thomas had to stop to help the injured man regain his balance. Each step took them closer to Thomas's ranch, but also deeper into territory where being seen helping a Native American could cost Thomas everything he had built. As they crested the final hill, Thomas's ranch spread out below them. The modest wooden house, the barn, the corrals filled with cattle. It represented 20 years of backbreaking work. Behind them, the sun began its descent toward the horizon, painting the sky in brilliant oranges and purples. "You're home," Running Wolf observed, his voice stronger now that water and shade were within reach. "Yeah," Thomas replied, but his mind was racing. What would his neighbors think? What about the territorial authorities? What about Running Wolf's own people? As they descended toward the ranch, Thomas made a decision that would change everything. Tomorrow's problems would have to wait. Tonight he had a man to heal. The next morning brought a crisp dawn to the Mackenzie ranch, but Thomas had barely slept. He'd spent most of the night tending to Running Wolf's injuries. setting the broken leg with splints made from barn wood and cleaning the wounds with precious whiskey that should have lasted him through winter. The young Shoshone warrior had endured the painful treatment with stoic silence, accepting help from a stranger who had every reason to leave him for dead. Running Wolf lay on a bed of hay in the barn, his leg elevated and wrapped. Thomas brought him water and hardtack, sitting cross-legged beside the makeshift bed. "How did you get hurt?" Thomas asked, offering the simple meal. Running Wolf's eyes grew distant. "My horse stepped in a prairie dog hole 3 days ago. Threw me hard. The horse ran off and I couldn't follow." He paused, studying Thomas's face. "Your people and mine. We don't usually help each other." Thomas nodded grimly. "I know. Things have been getting worse between the settlements and your tribe. Cattle missing, fences cut, people scared on both sides." "The cattle weren't taken by my people," Running Wolf said quietly. "We've been tracking white men who dress like us, paint their faces to look like warriors. They steal cattle and horses, leave Shoshone arrows behind." The words hit Thomas like a physical blow. For months, he and his neighbors had been preparing for what they believed was an inevitable conflict with the local tribe. Ranch hands had been hired more for their shooting skills than their cattle experience. Families had armed themselves and built stronger fences. "You're saying whites are stealing cattle and blaming your people?" "Yes. My father sent me to find proof, to stop the war that's coming. But I found something else." Running Wolf reached into his shirt and pulled out a silver pocket watch. "I took this from one of the fake warriors. Maybe you recognize it." Thomas examined the watch, his stomach dropping as he read the inscription. "To Deputy Marshal James Hartwell, for distinguished service." Hartwell was the territorial deputy who had been pushing hardest for military action against the Shoshone. "Sweet Jesus," Thomas breathed. "Hartwell's been stirring up trouble, convincing everyone the tribe is hostile. He profits from conflict," Running Wolf explained. "Sells weapons to scared settlers, gets government contracts to supply soldiers. But if there's peace, there's no money." Thomas spent the day processing this revelation while caring for his unexpected patient. Running Wolf shared stories of his people's perspective on the growing tensions, painting a picture vastly different from what Thomas had heard in town. The Shoshone were struggling to maintain their traditional hunting grounds, while adapting to the reality of increasing white settlement. They wanted peace, but Hartwell's false flag operations were making it impossible. "Why are you telling me this?" Thomas asked as the sun began to set. "How do you know I won't turn you in for the reward?" Running Wolf smiled for the first time since Thomas had found him. "Because you gave me your horse when you could have left me to die. A man with that kind of heart doesn't betray someone who trusts him." That evening, as Thomas sat on his porch watching the stars emerge, he wrestled with his conscience. The right thing to do was clear, but it would cost him everything. If he helped Running Wolf expose Hartwell's scheme, he'd be branded a traitor by his own neighbors. His ranch would be boycotted, possibly burned. He'd lose friends, customers, perhaps his life. But if he stayed silent, innocent people on both sides would die in a war built on lies. "Mr. Mackenzie," Running Wolf called from the barn. "Tomorrow, my people will come looking for me. When they find me here with you, they'll know something important has happened. My father will listen to you if I tell him to." Thomas stood, his decision crystallizing like ice on a winter morning. "Then we better have a plan ready." The two men spent the night crafting a strategy to expose Hartwell's deception and prevent the looming conflict. As dawn approached, Thomas realized he'd crossed a line from which there was no return. By sunrise, everything would change. Thomas woke before dawn to the sound of absolute silence. The usual morning chorus of birds was absent, and even the cattle seemed unusually quiet. He rose from his chair on the porch where he'd dozed fitfully, his rifle across his lap, and immediately understood why the world had gone still. His ranch was surrounded, dozens of Shoshone Warriors sat motionless on their horses in a perfect circle around his property, their faces painted for war, weapons at the ready. The sight should have terrified him, but Thomas felt only a strange sense of inevitability. Running Wolf had told him his people would come. "Running Wolf," Thomas called toward the barn. "Your people are here." The injured warrior emerged from the barn on makeshift crutches Thomas had carved the night before. Despite his injuries, Running Wolf stood tall and proud as he surveyed the circle of warriors. Thomas noticed the subtle tension in the horses, the way the warriors' hands rested near their weapons. One wrong move, one misunderstood gesture, and Thomas's ranch would become a battlefield that an older Shoshone man rode forward, his bearing marking him as a chief. His weathered face showed the wisdom of many winters and the pain of watching his people's world change. This had to be Running Wolf's father. "Father," Running Wolf called out in Shoshone, then switched to English for Thomas's benefit. "This is Thomas Mackenzie. He saved my life when he could have left me to die." Chief Gray Eagle studied Thomas with eyes that seemed to see straight through to his soul. "White man, my son tells me you know the truth about the stolen cattle, about the lies that push our peoples toward war." Thomas stepped forward, his hands visible and empty. The morning sun cast long shadows across the ranch yard, and he was acutely aware that every word he spoke could mean the difference between peace and bloodshed. "Chief Gray Eagle," Thomas began, his voice carrying across the silent circle, "your son spoke truth. Deputy Marshal Hartwell has been paying white men to dress as your warriors and steal cattle. He profits from the fear and anger, selling weapons and supplies to both the military and scared settlers." Thomas pulled out the pocket watch Running Wolf had given him. "This is Hartwell's watch. Your son took it from one of the fake warriors." "Chief." Gray Eagle examined the watch, his expression darkening. "How do we prove this to your people? They will not believe the word of Indians." "We don't tell them," Thomas said. "We show them." Over the next hour, Thomas outlined his plan. That evening, Hartwell's men were scheduled to hit the Morrison Ranch 5 miles south. Thomas had overheard them planning it at the saloon, believing it to be a genuine Shoshone raid. Instead, the Shoshone warriors would be waiting, hidden and ready to capture the false warriors in the act. "You risk everything for people who are not your tribe," Chief Gray Eagle observed. "Why?" Thomas looked around at the circle of warriors, then at Running Wolf leaning on his crutches. "Because Running Wolf is right. A man's heart shows in his actions. I can't stand by and watch lies tear apart this land." That evening, as the sun set over the Wyoming Territory, Thomas rode alongside Shoshone warriors toward the Morrison Ranch. The irony wasn't lost on him. Just days ago, such a sight would have seemed impossible. Now it felt like the only honest thing he'd done in months. The ambush went perfectly. Hartwell's men, disguised as Shoshone warriors, were caught red-handed stealing Morrison's cattle. The territorial authorities, alerted by Thomas's earlier message, arrived just as the captured thieves were confessing their crimes to save their own necks. Hartwell's arrest sent shockwaves through the territory. The revelation that the recent troubles had been orchestrated by a corrupt lawman rather than hostile Indians changed everything overnight. Fear gradually gave way to cautious dialogue between the settlements and the Shoshone. 3 months later, Thomas stood on his porch watching Running Wolf, now fully healed, help round up cattle that had strayed onto Shoshone land. The young warrior had become a bridge between the two communities, translating not just words but understanding. Chief Gray Eagle approached, leading Thomas's horse Belle. "Your mare is a good horse," he said with a slight smile. "But she belongs with the man who was willing to give her up for another's life." Thomas accepted Belle's reins, patting her neck affectionately. "Sometimes the hardest thing to do is the right thing to do." "And sometimes," Chief Gray Eagle replied, "the right thing changes everything." As the sun set over the now peaceful valley, Thomas reflected on how a single moment of compassion had transformed his world. The silence that had once signaled danger now represented the quiet confidence of a community learning to trust again. The ranch was no longer surrounded by warriors. It was surrounded by neighbors,